Good day, everybody, and welcome to today's SAAL structured conversation. This session is being recorded and closed captioning is available. My name is Julie Morrison. I'm the assessment director at Glendale Community College in Arizona, and I'm very excited to be here with my fellow Arizona colleagues that you'll hear from in just a moment. On behalf of SAAL's Professional Learning and Development Committee, I'd like to thank you for joining us here today or watching this recording if you are going to be not able to attend live, but are checking it out on our YouTube page. SAAL and our committee are committed to involving, featuring, and representing diverse perspectives and identities in our offerings and to meet your professional development needs. You can help us achieve this goal by submitting a structured conversation proposal of your own. More information can be found on our SAAL Structured Conversations page, and we'll pop that link into the chat. So if you want to be as awesome as today's presenters are, you can be here in a future meeting with us as a presenter as well. Now, during this presentation, we invite you to participate by asking questions, sharing comments, and providing feedback through the chat. We will be monitoring the chat and gathering that information for Q&A at the end. If you haven't yet, to get us started, please add information about your role and any other pertinent information about who you are so that we have a sense of who is in the audience today. Now, please join me in welcoming our presenters, Elisa Sperandio, Ned Tilbrook, and Jeff Bishop. They are from, as you can see, the University of Arizona in beautiful Tucson, Arizona. They are going to be introducing themselves and sharing their thoughts on screen reader accessibility in survey design. And on that note, I will turn it over to them so we can learn more.
Thank you, Julie, for the wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to be here with you all. So we're going to start by introducing ourselves in turn. So my name is Elisa Sperandio, she, her. I serve as manager of training and project development in assessment and research. And we'll say a little bit more about our units and how we collaborate with each other later on. But in my role, I lead our professional development unit in assessment and research to build capacity in assessment across the University of Arizona campus. And I consult on a host of sort of large student surveys, as well as qualitative projects. Excited to be here with you all. Ned?
Yeah, excited to be here with you all, everyone. My name is Ned Tilbrook. I work with Elisa in the Office of Assessment and Research, where my role is a research analyst. I do a lot of the building and kind of implementation of these surveys, as well as the analysis on the back end, as well as various other kind of quantitative analysis and reporting needs across campus with our partners. And I'm going to hand it over to Jeff.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Bishop. I work at the Disability Resource Center here at the University of Arizona. I'm an IT accessibility consultant, so I ensure that products, services, web applications, mobile applications, and other things are accessible and inclusive across our campus, and work with both faculty, students, and staff to ensure that they have what they need to be able to do what they're doing on our campus. So I'm happy to be here, and we have a lot of really fun things to talk about today. So and save your post your questions. We'll definitely answer them for you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all. So before we start, I want to go ahead. You'll see in the chat a link. You can access all the presentation materials in this folder. So if for any reason you're having trouble following along on our screen, you can open the slides in a separate screen at your leisure. You should see 3 items in there: a PDF of the slides, a PowerPoint that has videos that we'll be showing later today, and then a link to a resource that we developed around survey design and accessibility. So we'll be talking about all of those. I just wanted to give you a primer since I'm providing a link. So we are really excited to partner with SAAL to talk about an effort that our 2 units at the University of Arizona, so Assessment and Research and the Disability Resource Center, have now been engaged in collaborating in for about a year and a half. And so as you learn about today, we tested all question types across Qualtrics, Google Forms, and Microsoft Forms for screen reader accessibility, with the goal of creating a resource that could be used by our campus partners. So this is a project that starts very much from a need on the University of Arizona campus. So what will we discuss in today's presentation? So we will start with a brief overview of the process and collaboration. So what do our units do? How did we end up here? What are the factors that led to this process? We will then transition to a bit of a primer in principles of accessibility and survey design. And I'll say, of course, our focus today is surveys, but many of these principles are principles of universal design that don't just apply to survey development, but can also help make your websites, your reports more accessible. So hopefully there's plenty of opportunities to put those tools to the test. We will then transition into an overview of our findings in Qualtrics, Microsoft Forms, and Google Forms. And I should say we are a Qualtrics campus at the University of Arizona. Our decision to also test Microsoft Forms and Google Forms, and this might be your experience as well, is that although we use Qualtrics for big surveys, what we often see for often smaller departmental surveys is these tools like Microsoft Forms and Google Forms get used. So we wanted to kind of cover what are the types of tools that our campus base might be using in survey development. So that's the rationale for these three tools. Then we'll transition into demos. And so we'll have a few short videos that will hopefully help elucidate. Okay, yes, we can all agree that if a question is inaccessible, we won't use it. But what do users experience whenever there is an inaccessible question? So we'll have some demonstration for you all. And then we'll have conclusion and, of course, resources for continued learning. So you've already introduced yourself. I saw, thank you, Julie, for prompting that. So perhaps, though, we could engage still in this item. So on a scale from 1 to 5, how would you rate your familiarity in chat with principles of digital accessibility? And I want to say that we're all here today willing to learn. There's not a wrong place in the scale to place yourself at. We appreciate your willingness to learn, and we're just kind of curious of what the expertise of the folks in the room is. Great, I'm seeing some numbers come in. Okay, we see some 3s. I saw some 2s. All right. So we have a range 5. That's great. We have a range of scores here. Our goal is that by the end of today, you can place yourself certainly higher than where you started, and you have some resources to guide you as you explore, implement, improve, continue to think about accessibility on your campus. All right, so looking at our University of Arizona context, so assessment and research, which as you can see here is a unit under the wider umbrella of student success and retention innovation on our campus, is our hub for co-curricular undergraduate assessment. I want to start by saying that our assessment and research unit is small. There's 3 of us. I see Kendra also in attendance. Hi. Although some of you who work in higher education assessment across the US might also include academic program reviews and learning outcomes assessment in sort of your portfolio, there's a dedicated unit for curricular assessment at the university. So our focus is very much the co-curricular undergraduate assessment piece. We lead and consult on large undergraduate student surveys, which we define as surveys that are distributed to at least 1,000 students, so inviting at least 1,000 students. And as part of this, we also maintain an internal survey calendar, which sort of logs the currently occurring and then planned surveys at the University of Arizona. Not all the surveys that are on our survey calendars are surveys we coordinate. There's many coordinated by campus partners. We just sort of facilitate the transparent, available list of surveys happening on campus. And then we do lead a professional development suite aimed at increasing assessment capacity at the U of A. The Disability Resource Center, you likely have one on your campus, I would hope. It coordinates accommodation requests, event accessibility on campus, digital and IT accessibility. This is really important, including ASL interpreting. And they also coordinate the Disability Cultural Center. They offer consultation, as Jeff has already mentioned, on digital accessibility, including full surveys reviews. So this is something that our Disability Resource Center makes possible. So how did these 2 units come to collaborate on this specific task? So the timeline for this effort starts as far back as fall 2023. At the University of Arizona, we have a student services fee survey that is administered every 2 years in the fall. And it is a survey that allows students to provide input of how they want one specific fee, the student services fee, that is a part of their wider mandatory fee. It allows them input on how they want to see that fee allocated. So there is an advisory board that met in early fall. We were going to administer the survey in November 2023. And we received a question while preparing the survey development about the screen reader accessibility in the survey. It was a great question. And so at this time, we started collaborating with Jeff, with the Disability Resource Center, to implement a student screen reader accessibility in the survey. We were able to do this, and in November 2023, the survey launched with a question at the beginning that asked students if they were using a screen reader to complete the survey. And then depending on their answer, if they said yes, of course, they would branch off to a version of the survey that was entirely screen reader accessible. And no, it was sort of the default version of the survey. Though in November 2023, after implementing this, we realized that we wanted to take this effort forward, especially as we were thinking, how do we talk to our campus partners? We hadn't implemented this yet, but how do we talk to our campus partners about integrating this question of screen reader accessibility in every survey that they distribute, no matter how big and small? And so it's in January 2024 that the comprehensive testing efforts that we'll discuss later on start. So I'll say Ned and Jeff led the charge here and created test surveys that had every single question option and every display option across all three of the tools that we've discussed. This period of testing sort of culminated in a presentation that we gave to the University of Arizona campus. I would say it was very much version 1 of what you're seeing today. And it was an internal presentation for U of A audiences. And along with the presentation, we also distributed a resource titled Accessibility in Survey Design that is a part of our assessment toolkit. And the idea here is that for those who did not attend the presentation, for those who have not heard us talk about this work, there's still an opportunity to access a resource that really distills both the findings and then some general principles that can help guide the implementation on demand. The work didn't end though in April. We have been engaged in regular testing since. So quarterly testing happened in July 2024 and then more recently in January 2025. As you all know, the websites change, platforms change very fast. So to account for the fact that these are very much alive tools and their accessibility might change, we have built in this quarterly timeline. So what did we see after in November 2023, the student services fee went out? How many students actually ended up availing themselves of screen reader accessibility options? So we saw the 236 U of A students, and I should say the student services fee survey goes to all main campus students, graduate and undergraduate. So we saw that 236 U of A students who took the survey selected the screen reader option. So that was about 8% of our total respondents. This was perhaps more than we had expected, but it really drove home the importance then of better understanding how can we ensure that we not only implement this in our surveys, but we communicate to other campus partners who might be developing their own what screen readers are, ensuring that there's a clear sort of understanding of what the accessibility principles that should guide engagement with them are. And so for starters, if you're not familiar with screen reader technologies, the latest survey conducted by WebAIM found that JAWS was the leading desktop screen reader, followed by NVDA at 37.5%. But it is important to note that usage of these tools varies greatly by region, so understanding sort of your user base is important. Google Chrome is also the most popular browser, followed by Microsoft Edge. These are some considerations that those that are more tech inclined than us might appreciate. So then in entering this collaboration, we really had 3 questions that were guiding us. First, how do we make surveys more accessible for all users? So as we'll talk about today, universal design is principles that, yes, certainly serve the accessibility needs of folks with disabilities, visual impairments, but they can also help all sorts of other users. The idea is really to increase accessibility across the board. So to reduce, for instance, reducing the use of jargon is an accessibility principle, but it doesn't just serve students with disabilities. It might also serve international students who may not be familiar with that jargon, right? So really thinking holistically about how can we extend the benefits as far as we can reach. Second is following accessibility guidelines by platforms like Qualtrics enough to ensure accessibility, at least for what we were envisioning for our project. So if you've engaged with Qualtrics, Microsoft Forms, Google Forms, you might know that there are sort of guidelines on accessibility built in. So in starting this collaboration, one question is, can we simply sort of circulate these guidelines? Is that enough? Is that sufficient? And so this is one of the reasons why we launched into the testing. We wanted to better get at this question. And then what resources can we provide to campus partners that are developing surveys? So for us, it didn't necessarily feel appropriate to only provide the results of survey testing. Understanding that folks might come to this topic with differing level of expertise, we wanted to provide something that also laid the foundation to ensure that everybody had a good base for engagement. And so the resulting resource is an accessibility-focused assessment toolkit item. So the assessment toolkit, we have a web page on our website where we collect all resources that our unit develops, helping folks who are planning assessment projects. So anything on survey methodologies, we would include here. Among these resources, we included the document that came out of this effort. And so this is available to campus and non-campus users. So there's a direct link to it in the folder that I shared. You all should be able to access it. This is reviewed for updates quarterly. And as well as our findings, it also includes 20 principles of accessibility in survey design that we by no means invented or distilled out of pure knowledge. These are resources that we are drawing on. So the California State University Cal State University Northridge has a really excellent Making Accessible Surveys page that we relied on and cite. The University of California also has an electronic accessibility guidelines page, and then we include a few other resources at the end of this presentation. But so without further ado, I want to now transition. I'll pass the word on to Jeff to talk to us a little bit about sort of the essential principles in survey accessibility and how you might apply them. Jeff, the floor is yours.
All right. I keep hearing chat, so I'm going to mute things here so that we don't get interrupted. There you go. All right. Thanks, everybody. Well, first of all, I want to appreciate all of you being here, because really you're already a winner in trying to elevate your game centered around accessibility just by being here and learning more. So thank you so very much for doing that. It's all about empowering people, right? And really giving them an opportunity to be able to participate inclusively in the process of taking your specific surveys. So we have 4 slides that we're going to talk through today. And the first thing that I will mention, there was a mention of a question that has been asked on our surveys to whether or not you're using a screen reader or not. I know that we're doing that. Ideally, I would hope that we would build surveys such that we don't need that question, that we're using question types, and that we're doing things in a way that's fully inclusive, so that users don't have to be asked that question. That would be ideal. Now, that's not going to be the case for some situations, but you can really learn that if users are having issues from an accessibility perspective, then that's also going to impact people cognitively as well, right? Because you have to meet people where they are in reference to their user experience. So I just wanted to point that out at the beginning here, just to say that, hey, remember, you're going to be experiencing all different types of users and situations. So try to make sure that things are simple, easy to follow along with and deal with there in your surveys, okay? If you can't see it, hear it, or interact with it, you can't answer it on a survey, okay? So that's really a fundamental goal here of your surveys. So let's talk about some principles here centered around accessibility. First of all, avoid imaged or video-based question types. If you do have them, then make sure that there are alternatives or ways of getting at the content that's trying to be conveyed. If, for example, if you're showing graphs or charts or images, then you want to make sure that those have alternative text. If you're showing a video or something like that, make sure that there is an alternative method of getting the meaning of that content on your survey, especially if it's required to understand how to proceed on the survey. Basically, the rule of thumb here is don't assume that people are going to look at pictures or videos. Make sure that information is conveyed in multiple ways such that people can understand it. Okay, that's really important. Do not rely on color alone to convey meaning. And this is something that we all deal with. And by the way, most of these principles, as already stated, are things that if you take these principles into play for everything that you do, whether you're creating a Word document, an email, a website page, whatever the case may be, these are really important principles that you want to be thinking about all the time, not just for surveys. Again, do not rely on color alone. A lot of people are colorblind, and a lot of those people drive, and that's why we have additional ways of telling what the signals mean when we're driving in our cars, right? By position. Okay. Use asterisks, or better yet, use actual words to denote required fields. Sometimes screen reader users will turn off punctuation in their screen reader, and so that could be a problem. So make sure that you are representing that, especially for your required fields. Emphasize text properly. Don't use all uppercase. Use bold, italics, underline, those things where possible. That's going to be the proper way to denote that. Again, don't rely on that completely. Make sure that the message is clear. Oftentimes, a screen reader user will not look for bold, underline, or italic text on a web page and may not understand the conveying of that meaning. Okay. If information is only shown in one way, it's not enough. Remember, you have to meet people where they are, and you have to move forward in ensuring that they have what they need to participate. Okay, let's move on to structuring surveys for accessibility. And we have just a few things to talk about here. Remember that when you're presenting your survey, you're talking about this from the standpoint of organization. Think about a library. If you're going out to a library and you're looking at shelves in a library, or just in your house, you want to try to keep things as organized as possible. At least I try to. That way I can find them. Kind of challenging sometimes. Okay, the first thing here is, and probably one of the most important things, is use headings properly. We define headings as heading level 1 through heading level 6, and this helps the screen reader user move from question to question type. And if there are questions that drill into a hierarchical manner, then you want to make sure that you're using appropriate level heading levels. So for example, if you have a question and then you have sub questions underneath that, or additional information that provides clarity and then dives into the questions, then use headings correctly here. So start at heading level 2, move to heading level 3. Just make sure that you're using them in the order that they are recommended to be used. Don't jump around, right? Don't go to heading level 2 and then 4 and then back to 3 and then back to 5, right? Be consistent in your heading structure. Okay. Again, use really, really great heading layout for your surveys. Use progress indicators. This is something that cognitively is really important. Make sure people understand how far along they are in the survey, and also provide the number of the question that they're on if possible. Sometimes that's not possible, but at least make sure that there's a progress indicator to let them know, how far along they are in the actual, within the survey itself. Okay. Try to use fonts that are really readable. Remember that you're dealing with people with all kinds of different situations as far as their vision is concerned. So try to use a font between 18 and 20 point. You know, we often sometimes see signs on the road that are really small and it's hard to even read them. So the same principles apply here to surveys as well. Let's talk a little bit about vertical versus horizontal layout. And this is something that often doesn't get talked about very much, but really the goal here is you want to make sure that people are focusing in on the intent of your survey and not so much about how to actually navigate or utilize the survey itself. Okay. Try to keep things as much as possible in a vertical manner. Okay. Screen readers read things from left to right, top to bottom. And just from an organization standpoint, try to keep things simple. Simpler is better. And that's true in anything, not just accessibility, but simpler is always better. Try to keep your surveys really clean, crisp, and you know, really easy to understand. Vertical lists really provide a great way of ensuring that people understand the flow of your survey. Avoid side-by-side form fields. And by the way, make sure that those form fields are properly labeled and have the appropriate markup. And if you're utilizing a tool, we'll talk about which question types to ensure that takes place. But just make sure that that's done as well. That's really, really important. In fact, that's probably the most important thing in your surveys, is to make sure those labels exist on your actual question types. Okay. Make sure that the keyboard order, meaning if you're tabbing through the survey, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a few minutes, is consistent, right? Make sure that it flows well, that you're not jumping around on the page, and that the tab order is correct. So test your surveys with a keyboard. Don't assume people are using a mouse. Okay. Okay, enhancing screen reader usability. Okay, let's talk a little about these concepts here. We talked about this already, but all images must have alternative text. Don't say that it's a picture of, that's already known. Make sure that the image description provides the meaning or the intent that you are trying to convey as part of the question, right? It's not just good enough to say this is a picture of a dog, right? First of all, you shouldn't tell them it's a picture of a dog. They already know it's a picture because they're looking at it as an image. So just make sure that people understand the intent of your images. If they are decorative images, meaning they're there just for providing, you know, like spacing or lines or something like that, and it's not really there for a meaningful reason except for visual layout, then make sure to provide a blank alternative text attribute on those images so that the screen reader doesn't see them. Because if you don't, then it's going to say something like image 492768.jpg, and people will not even understand what that is. So just make sure that you're doing that. Okay. Check color contrast with WebAIM, and there's plenty of these tools out there, but the WebAIM color contrast checker is great. It's free and it can be found. We'll provide that resource to you. That's really important to make sure that your surveys are meeting great color contrast. Make sure to warn people about timeout situations. For example, if your survey has time limits, make sure that's clearly noted on the survey. And oftentimes that actually can create accessibility issues. So you might want to be really cognizant of that. I'm not seeing that as being something that happens too often on surveys, but if it does, you want to make sure that you're accommodating people if they require more time. Okay, and testing for accessibility, which is really the heart of all of this, and it's about partnering and making sure you do things in a way where you're ensuring that accessibility is met. So you wouldn't serve food without tasting it first, right? Make sure it's all good. Use built-in accessibility checkers. So you can use things like, well, on the web, it's a little harder. Not as many of these, but we'll talk about what's available there. If you're producing a survey and you're distributing it in a format that's not on the web, and I would hope that if you're you're doing a survey that it's on the web, because that's really the more inclusive way to do it, then make sure you're using, tools such as the accessibility checker that's built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, that really goes for communication as well if you're sending out email. Utilize those built-in things. They're there for a reason. They're really, really good, and they catch the majority of things. So just be cognizant of that. Think of it as a spell checker for your document. You'd never ship out something if it's not spell checked, right? We always do that. Use tools like the WebAIM Wave accessibility checker or Accessibility Insights, which is my personal favorite. Both of these tools are amazingly great, and you can check your surveys for accessibility and make sure that they meet accessibility standards and make sure that they're working well. Work with your DRC department or associated department and do a manual accessibility audit. That's really important because these automation tools are only going to capture about 40 to 50% of the issues that could exist on a web page. So it's really important that you are taking the time to do that. Okay, so partner with people who are experts in this space. They're there for a reason to lend a hand and give you some assistance. Work with your digital accessibility team. Again, we talked about keyboard navigation. Make sure you're checking for great keyboard experiences. You want to make sure that the survey is fully accessible and inclusive and will work across modalities, right? All kinds of people are going to be using different types of tools, and some are even going to be using tools that require their voice or other devices. And a lot of those things rely on keyboard access to be able to do that, okay? Try using the survey with simply pressing tab and shift tab. Make sure that survey flows well from the keyboard perspective. Before launching your survey, do these quick things. Keyboard only test, which is really important. Use a screen reader like NVDA, VoiceOver, JAWS for Windows, any of those types of things. And make sure to check your surveys for color contrast. Finally, a call to action here, people. Really, accessibility is not just a feature, it's a core requirement. In fact, the Department of Justice has mandated that for states and educational institutions, that public-facing things such as surveys and these types of things must be fully accessible and inclusive. And so we have to be bound by those requirements. If people have accessible surveys, they'll have a better day. It'll be a much better cognitive experience for users. Small changes make a great impact on survey design. Surveys without accessibility testing is just as bad as surveys with typos. You wouldn't want to do that, right? You want to make sure that your surveys are fully engaging and inclusive and great for every person in your audience to be able to achieve what you're trying to do in your surveys. So I will be here at the end for additional questions or comments, but these are things that you just want to be keeping in mind as you work through the implementation of your surveys. And if you require anything, just put it in chat. We'll address it at that time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to take us home from here. And this is just a quick overview of our findings from Qualtrics, from a lot of the questions that we tested. I'm not going to take you through all of them. We are going to have some demos in a bit. But kind of some general kind of themes from this is that text entry stuff is very accessible here. Things like matrices and other questions with buttons, where we found issues was more to do with the sort of indexing of those things sometimes. So say you have a matrix with 3 columns and 3 rows, it might not tell you that you're in, if you're in the 3rd row in the 2nd box, it might just keep reading sort of 1 of 1 in those ones, and that is kind of the issue there. Some of these slider questions, similar sort of issue where if you are moving from, if you're asked to rate something out of 10 and you're trying to get to 7, it might not tell you that how far along on that you are. And then some of these, obviously some ones that are really probably never going to be accessible are things like the heat map that the heat map where you have to, use a JPEG to do that. Yeah, Nathan, I did see your question at the top there about the new survey experience. This was done in the classic interface. We have more question types there. What I will say about the new survey experience is, to my knowledge, although Qualtrics has got some claims that it's improved accessibility on that, some of this indexing one-to-one is to do with issues of the survey talking to the particular browser or screen reader that you're using. So while they may be improved somewhat, I don't believe they've fully been kind of solved by the new screen reader. If we can move on to the next slide, please, we'll get onto the first demo. So I'm going to just hand over to our pre-recorded version of Jeff here to take us through this drag and drop matrix.
Okay, everyone, we're here on a Qualtrics survey page, and this is a drag and drop control on the survey. And
like heading level 3.
If you look here, the screen reader does not see this control at all and cannot interact with it. We'll arrow down.
Heading level 3, neither like nor dislike. Heading level 3, like. Group end, how much do you like, ... Main region end. Navigation region, next button.
And that's it. So there's no way from a keyboard perspective for a screen reader user to be able to efficiently use this specific type of control.
So yeah, just again, avoiding anything that really requires a mouse. There's no real way for a screen reader user to answer a question like this accurately. So we'll move on to the next demo.
Okay, everyone, we're here.
Which is the side-by-side, and I see a question about it in chat, so.
Look at a Qualtrics survey question where we have a side-by-side view of questions that are using radio buttons. Now, according to Qualtrics, these are accessible. What we have found is that while they may claim they're accessible, the user experience is not ideal. So I'm going to move to the table here.
10 columns and 5 rows. Please rate the following food outlets on the criteria below. Column 1, row 1, blank.
And I can see that it's a table. And if I press the tab key,
good value, yes, check dash fill dash a radio button checked, 1 of 1.
It tells me that there's 1 of 1, which is really not accurate because really there's a yes and no here selection. Now, one might argue that this is accessible. From a user perspective, they're going to think there is only one choice because the screen reader is identifying only one indexed value. But if they use their virtual cursor or navigate within the page itself, they can up and down arrow through the page and get access to the content. So
good value, no check dash fill dash a radio button not checked.
So I'm going to select no for this.
Space, Qualtrics survey vertical bar, Qualtrics experience manager.
And I can continue that process throughout the survey here.
Good quality, yes, check dash fill dash a radio. Good quality, no check dash fill space. Good quality on deck deli. Good value, yes, on deck deli radio space. On deck deli. Good value, good quality, yes, on deck deli radio space. Good Papa John apostrophe yes. Good value, yes, Papa John space. Good quality, yes, pop space. Good quality.
So yes, I can fill out the survey, but from a cognitive level, this is a bit difficult for a screen reader user to really understand the layout of this question type. So
yeah, again, some issues with the indexing there, in particular.
I'm so sorry. The tech.
That's all right. Don't worry about it.
I will let you talk.
So some issues with the indexing there, and again, this is something where we do see in some browsers and with some screen readers, this may have better indexing, but certainly it's not kind of universally accessible. I will also add that there is kind of, so this one on the Qualtrics end might be accessible, but is perhaps not always in practice. One thing that you might do to mitigate this, although we still wouldn't necessarily recommend this question type, is by, as I believe Jess mentioned, being really detailed in the question text at the top about what the kind of 2 side-by-side parts are and what the options are. Still not ideal, but can help mitigate some of those issues. We'll have the third demo.
Now let's take a look at a Qualtrics survey question where we have a side-by-side view of questions that are using radio buttons.
I'm seeing the same one again.
Now, according to Qualtrics, these are accessible. What we have found is that...
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're looking at a drop-down in Qualtrics. And this is going to require a bit of explanation from a navigation experience for a screen reader user. Screen reader users use a virtual cursor to be able to navigate through the document. Think of a web page as though it were displayed like in a notepad window, and you can up and down arrow through the text. We have commands that can issue us to specific controls on the page. For example, if I hit the letter B,
next button,
I get to the next button. And if I go back to the top here, I should be able to hit the letter C to jump to the combo box that's showing on this page. However, if I press it now,
no selectable ARIA controls, combo boxes, list boxes, or tree views.
The screen reader has no way of knowing that there's actually a drop down on this page. So this is already a problem for especially a basic to slightly intermediate screen reader user. An advanced screen reader user will know what to do about this problem. They'll probably navigate to, after examining this page, they'll probably navigate to the button.
Next button.
Which is the next button. They'll turn off what's called they will turn off what's called the virtual cursor, which basically puts the screen reader into a mode like you would be navigating on the web page. And they do that with a command on the keyboard, insert Z.
Off.
And the screen reader says off. And now I can shift tab.
Qualtrics survey vertical bar Qualtrics experience management powered by Qualtrics : learn more about Qualtrics in a new tab link. Work profile button menu.
Let's see here.
Navigation region. Next button. Main region. Select all of the places you like to eat in the union group. Select all of the places you like to eat in the union extended. Select list box.
So now we're in the list box and we can up and down arrow.
Select all of the places you like to eat in the union. Saffron bites. Papa John 'S.
But we don't know which of these are selected. And you can actually, this is a multi-selection list box. You can do it with the keyboard, but you're not told which items are selected versus which items are not. So we would encourage you not to utilize this type of control in your Qualtrics surveys due to the accessibility issues that are found here.
Yeah, some issues with knowing what you've selected in a box like this. But if we move on to the next demo, case number 4.
Okay, so now we're looking at
it's playing this one again. Then we do have kind of a counterexample for that of where this works. And this is actually one where Qualtrics says it's not accessible, but I'll let Jeff from the past explain more.
And finally, we have a Qualtrics field here where we can rank a value. Now, this one is really interesting. I actually like the way that Qualtrics did this. There's only one caveat to this, and I'll describe it to you. But let's say that we want to move Microsoft Forms to the top of the list.
Rank the choices list box. Microsoft Forms 3 of 3.
And it tells me Microsoft Forms 3 of 3. And I want to move it up to the top. So as you can see, there are arrows both on the left and right side of the control in the tab order. They're fully keyboard navigatable, so I can tab.
Upwards arrow button. Downwards arrow button.
There's up and down here. So I can move it up. I can shift tab back up to the up arrow here.
Upwards arrow button.
And I can press that button twice.
Space, space.
And if I shift tab.
Rank the choices list box. Microsoft Forms 1 of 3.
It tells me that it's moved up to the top of the list. Ideally, what should happen is when I press that button, it would tell me that it's now in position 2 or position 1 auto-magically, but it's not doing that. However, unlike Microsoft Forms, it does not move the focus away from the button. So I can more efficiently move things up and down in my survey selections, which I do like. And I find that to be a more ideal user experience. So while Qualtrics might recommend that this is not accessible, we found actually that this is usable, and we would recommend this type of control in your Qualtrics surveys.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So yeah, that concludes our demos here. I know we're running out of time, so we'll just move on to some of our little findings about Google Forms and Microsoft Forms. So Google Forms, obviously much less kind of flexible, much less options in terms of questions than Qualtrics, but if you are doing a simple survey and you don't need to use any of the like embedded analysis tools within Qualtrics, this does very well on accessibility, and we found Google Forms to be very accessible. Microsoft Forms, even fewer options than Google Forms, and some of these questions come out in that usable but not ideal, some of those issues with indexing, for example, but it does perform sort of reasonably well, but we would recommend Google Forms over Microsoft Forms for some of those shorter surveys where you're not using Qualtrics. So just to wrap up some of our takeaways here, that it's important to embed principles of accessibility in our surveys. You know, as I think Jeff and Elisa have mentioned throughout, you know, ultimately, if everyone can't take the survey, these important surveys that inform decision-making on our campuses, then, you know, those students' voices are effectively being eliminated from those decisions, which is obviously concerning. We do, I know Jeff mentioned earlier that, this isn't the kind of ideal endpoint of this, but for now we do ask respondents if they're using a screen reader. And that does lead to kind of two branching paths in the survey, one of which is a version optimized for mobile usage, which is what we have most of our students take their surveys on, and one that's optimized for screen reader usage. Now, I saw there was a question about progress bars in the chat. We'll come back to that, I'm sure. But what we will do is do display logic and have those questions just one after the other, the mobile version, the screen reader version, the mobile version, the screen reader version. So in that case, the progress bar isn't kind of misleading in that same way. It's pretty easy to just kind of copy the question and change the format. It generally works very well. Does add that little extra step on the back end, but if you've got a good naming convention, SR underscore question name and then M underscore question name, when you pull it into your analysis software, it's pretty easy to do a replace with the SR value if the M value is missing, or vice versa. And then, of course, using those built-in accessibility checkers is really important, but that manual test is what's going to be really, really important and make up for some of the shortcomings of those web-based accessibility checkers. Yes, and so here is an example of what we would do at the top of a survey to ask if a student is using a screen reader survey. This is actually not from one of ours in assessment and research. We were consulting on this, but on this accessibility piece. But actually, we did a couple of surveys before this where we had this question, and it was a much shorter version where we were just asking students to sort of yes, no, are you using a screen reader question? And what we found was consistently in both, we had 8% of all students using a screen reader, but 18% of international students. And so that got us thinking, is this perhaps a bit of a miscommunication, a bit of a language barrier issue maybe, where some students might think we're asking, are you taking this survey like digitally on a screen, or are you taking it in a paper version, which is obviously not what we intended. So this is a kind of newer version with a more full explanation of what a screen reader is and that it's about accessibility. And I believe, I don't have the date to hand, but I believe we did see a bit of a closing of that gap with the international students after this was implemented in this survey. So I think we just have a couple more slides, which will be just to remind folks that we have that assessment toolkit available and we are updating it periodically, and you'll get these slides after the presentation. So you'll be able to access these links as well as all these other resources on survey accessibility and web accessibility more generally. And I think that takes us to the end, and we'll answer your questions now.
All right, thank you very much. And we promised this wasn't planned, but if you were following along in the chat, you noticed we were having background issues during this presentation with closed captioning. And so you might have seen some of us going on and off screen as we were trying to resolve it. We never actually did get it resolved. And the reason I say, like, did you think we planned it, is this is, such a great tie-in to what we're thinking about here, which is accessibility. And we had this wonderful presentation from our presenters, and we'll dive into questions here in a moment, about this is not the experience we want people to have when we are hosting an event or a survey or whatever else. And so the idea of checking everything ahead of, and we know things will go wrong, but the more we can be prepared, I think the more proactive this is. So not intentional, but great live demonstration of when you don't do your accessibility checks fully. And thank you very much for those of you who were very kind in understanding our captioning issue. So there have been a number of questions that have come into the chat. A few from Nathan and one from Meryl have already been answered live. Before we go kind of back, and we'll go through them in order, I want to jump just to the last one that Meryl put in, because it just links to what we were just seeing in the demonstrations. And so there was a question when you were showing the list boxes, if the problem for list boxes was also true for drop downs in Qualtrics. And if you
can, a reminder to drink water.
You want me to handle this one, Ned?
I believe I have it here that we do have the drop-down matrix is not accessible because of an indexing issue, Jeff. I just pulled up our testing,
Yeah, I think this was also addressing the comma box versus list box issues. There's different types of question types in Qualtrics that will definitely work. And if you look at our matrix, you'll be able to tell that which ones to use as far as the different types of question types.
right, so we have about 5 or so minutes for Q&A, but if there are more questions coming in, please drop them into the chat. If we can't get them answered here, we will see about getting them answered for you. But let's go back to an earlier question that Matthew put in the chat, which was, how do you contend with progress readers sometimes appearing misleading with branching surveys, typically giving the impression there's more remaining than there actually might be?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I mentioned, there's some things we can do in terms of the way we order those questions or those blocks to make them less misleading. In terms of like alternating between the screen reader and the mobile version. In general, I'll be honest, those really kind of complex kind of branching logics is not something we've used in a lot of student surveys. I have done it in a couple, and it's not ideal. But I think Jeff, you were going to speak. Correct me if I'm wrong.
As far as, like branching surveys, is that what we're talking about here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this one is a bit tricky, because, for example, if someone is selecting a choice and it jumps you from, you're going to bypass a more major portion of the survey. This can be challenging, and so I think this is where you have to just get real creative in reference to showing the percentage of progress rather than, yeah. And yes, we have considered talking with Qualtrics on these things, and we've submitted tickets on them. But yeah, I would handle this by showing percentages. You're 48% complete on the survey. That probably will help in this situation in rectifying this. That's what I would do personally.
And I just want to chime in and add, there really isn't the part of the accessibility puzzle is a puzzle. There might not be a one size fits all, right? So perhaps you're working in a tool where the progress bar is not accessible. So we had a comment come through in the chat about the accessibility of the Qualtrics bar. And then perhaps, okay, so then you can use question numbers, right? And then you number all of your questions. But that doesn't really work because, look, you have a branching survey and now those question numbers are all scrambled, right? Well, what else can you do? Then you can add a statement at the beginning of the survey that clearly indicates the time expectation that students can plan for as they're starting to take the survey. So in short, what we reviewed today are a lot of, I'm talking about the general principles here, not our sort of detailed testing. A lot of the general principles are just that, they're general, and therefore they will not fit across all of your use cases. And in that case, there's really just a sort of decision tree, right? This didn't work. Where do I move to next? Where do I move to next? With the optic, though, if your goal is clear in the sense that what you're trying to do is provide a sense of progress, give people a clear sense of time expectation, there's several ways you can get at that. So that's the important, I think, takeaway.
All right, we have 2 questions, and then I'm going to put you to work in the last minute of this. So we'll get to that in a moment. Rachel had a question basically about UDL. Should we avoid underlining because of the assumption that it's a hyperlink?
Underlining if it's what? I'm sorry.
Because people might assume it's a hyperlink. So should you avoid underlining?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Probably. Again, it's all about just making sure that you have to look at these things on a case-by-case basis, but it's all about ensuring people understand intent. So, so just make sure that you're conveying things multiple ways to ensure people understand clarity.
Thank you. And then Nathan had, different Nathan, by the way, we have a couple of Nathans being very active in the chat, so thank you. Was wondering whether you found similar themes from SurveyMonkey or REDCap. They write, I know they are not on your current assessment, but just seeing if you've looked at either of those platforms.
Well, I have, at least SurveyMonkey, and we ran into some issues with SurveyMonkey. I work outside of the U of A with a few nonprofits, and we've run into issues with that. But in general, SurveyMonkey is accessible, but we have not done a deep dive audit of every question type that they offer.
All right, and then the last question here comes from John, wondering about whether you have created accessible maps or they're good examples.
That is an entirely different topic than surveys today.
Okay.
It's something that is pretty involved and complex. So it all depends on how the maps are generated and ways of solving that one. And it's a giant puzzle to be solved for sure.
All right.
In
Okay. So
terms of-
oh,
if I could just
yeah,
chime
go
in on
ahead,
that as
Nick.
well. I think in terms of like I think there was an example we had about the hotspot question in Qualtrics, where you might have a map, say, and the students are asked to say where they feel most comfortable on campus. I don't believe there is a way to make that accessible currently, just because Qualtrics is having you upload an image file and there's not another kind of way to do that.
All right, now we're also going to put ourselves out here for a moment in our last couple of minutes. Typically at the end of these, that we not only thank our speakers, which we will do in a moment, and we will ask those of you in the audience if whether you hit your learning objectives, but we also typically announce what the next structured conversation is. We are not specifically identifying the date and the time of that because we are going to be soliciting panelists to be our presenters in March. That solicitation is going to be in a Qualtrics survey. So what I am going to do right now is share what this survey looks like. And I want our presenters to take a moment and look at it. I realize we don't have screen readers enabled right now to see what you think of the accessibility of this survey. And I'm going to show it to you just like it's going to pop up. And then we will give this link to all our presenters who can hopefully either say yes or send it to a friend who might be able to say yes.
Jeff will not be able to access. I would suggest putting the link in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. Or get it to us and we can assess that for you outside of this.
It does look, this question, I will say, with kind of just 3 options where you're asking someone to select one. One of the 3 should typically be accessible because there wouldn't be too many issues with like multiple selections. The possible issue that might come up is that indexing, but if you are asking people again to select one of 3 options, then that's not too difficult to kind of figure out, I suppose.
And then let me show you. So at first I'm like, well, how do I say, if I say yes, what do I say? And I'm like, I don't see a place to put my name. And I might have tried clicking on the nose and I'm not finding it. But then when I clicked on the yes, I do, it opens up this later section. So it's not.
As long as it's done properly, and then I can assess this if you'd like. You can want to just get me the link and we'll test it for you. But
Sure.
as long as Qualtrics is doing it correctly and ensuring that tab order is working well, then yeah, you can have dynamic surveys where things get shown and hidden and all of those things. We'll just need to test it and do that verification step. But yeah, we can do that for you.
Well, and I don't know whether we want you to. We were just going to throw. Maybe we do.
Happy to do it.
Excellent. Maybe we'll include that in the information that we send out. I mean, it is a short survey. So thank you very much. We are approaching the end of our time. One of the things I want to drop into the chat really quick for those of you who are able to stay for 30 more seconds is the learning outcomes that our presenters had. If you want to look at these and say which one you think you hit the most, just drop that number right into the chat. I did see a lot of appreciation to our presenters, not only for the content, but the demos especially, because that's really where it hits home. So I do want to thank our presenters, Elisa, Ned, and Jeff. If you can, throw some digital applause in there, say some thank yous as you're popping some of your numbers in, we can get a good sense of, what your learning outcomes were. That would be wonderful. We will be sending you a recording of today's session along with the resources that they've already shared. We will include that accessibility eval of our short survey, right in practice here. And again, if you want to be an awesome presenter like these, you can submit to present, or maybe you have some expertise in one of these topics that we were just talking about for our March one, which has to do with program sunset tools, eco-cycle processing. And so I'm just going to drop one last thing into the chat. And on that note, I know we're 1 minute over, but if our presenters would like to say a final goodbye, we would love to hear it.
Thank you all for coming. It was great to engage. And please reach out. Our emails are on the slides if you have any questions. And thank you all.
Yes, and we will include all that information in the follow-up message, which should be out in a few days along with the recording. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our SAAL structured conversation, and we hope to see you in future ones.